The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in April 1883, addressed to a Miss Helena Lawson at the Chloride post office in New Mexico Territory. But no such woman existed in the dusty silver mining town of 300 souls. Fletcher Fontaine stood behind the worn counter of his general store, which doubled as the unofficial mail depot since the actual postmaster had died of pneumonia the previous winter, and no replacement had arrived yet. He turned the envelope over in his calloused hands, studying the elegant script that spelled out a name he had never heard in the 2 years since he had drifted into Chloride with nothing but a horse, a saddle, and enough money to buy the failing store from a widow who wanted to return east to her family. The envelope felt thick, substantial. The return address showed it came from Philadelphia, from someone named Margaret Whitmore. Fletcher set it aside in the cubbyhole where unclaimed mail gathered dust, figuring someone would eventually ask about it or the sender would realize their mistake. He went back to inventorying the canned goods that had just arrived by wagon from Santa Fe, his mind already moving past the mystery of the misaddressed letter. 3 weeks passed. More letters arrived for Helena Lawson. First one, then 2 more in quick succession. Fletcher began to wonder if this woman was supposed to be coming to Chloride, if perhaps she had purchased property sight unseen or was joining family. But he asked around the saloons and the boarding houses and the mining offices, and nobody had heard of any Helena Lawson planning to arrive. The letters piled up. Fletcher found himself thinking about them at odd moments when he was measuring out flour for the Mexican families who lived on the edge of town, or when he was helping unload timber for the mine supports. Who was this woman who did not exist? And who cared enough about her to keep writing? By June, there were 9 letters. Fletcher had taken to storing them in a wooden box beneath the counter. He told himself he was just being a responsible temporary postmaster, keeping them safe until their rightful owner appeared. But sometimes, late at night when the store was closed and he was alone in the small room he had built onto the back, he would take out the box and look at the letters, wondering about the story they contained. He never opened them. That would have been a violation of trust, of the unwritten code that governed men in the territories. But he allowed himself to wonder, to imagine, to construct elaborate histories for this Helena Lawson, who existed only in the careful handwriting on these envelopes. The summer heat descended on Chloride with its usual merciless intensity. The mines continued to pull silver from the earth, the saloons continued to separate miners from their wages, and life in the town followed its predictable patterns. Fletcher ran his store, extending credit to families he trusted and refusing it to men who spent everything on whiskey and cards. He had developed a reputation as fair but firm, a man who kept his word and expected others to do the same. Then, on a blazing afternoon in late July, when the heat made the air shimmer above the dirt street and most sensible people stayed inside, a woman stepped down from the stagecoach that ran twice weekly between Chloride and the railhead at Socorro. Fletcher was across the street, delivering an order of coffee and sugar to the boarding house, when he saw her. She wore a dark blue traveling dress that had seen hard miles, and she carried a single carpet bag that looked nearly as worn as she did. Her hair, a rich brown that caught copper highlights in the harsh sun, had been pinned up but was coming loose in wisps around her face. She stood for a moment beside the stage, looking up and down the street with an expression Fletcher could not quite read. Not quite fear, not quite hope. Something in between, something that spoke of exhaustion and determination in equal measure. The stage driver handed down a small trunk from the roof, and the woman thanked him. Her voice carried across the street, low and surprisingly strong. Fletcher found himself walking toward her without quite deciding to do so, his boots raising small clouds of dust with each step. She turned as he approached, and he saw her face clearly for the first time. She was perhaps 25, with high cheekbones and eyes that were an unusual gray-green, the color of sage after rain. There was a hardness around those eyes, the kind that came from seeing too much trouble too soon. But also, a resilience that suggested she had survived whatever had put that hardness there. "Excuse me," Fletcher said, pulling his hat from his head in a gesture his mother had drilled into him long ago, back in Missouri before the war had torn everything apart. "I run the general store and I handle the mail. Would you happen to be Miss Helena Lawson?" The woman's eyes widened. Her hand went to her throat, fingers touching the high collar of her dress. She began, then stopped. "How did you know?" Fletcher felt something shift in his chest, a sensation he could not quite name. "You have letters," he said. "Quite a few of them. They have been arriving since April." Helena Lawson closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, they glistened with unshed tears. "Thank God," she whispered. "Thank God they made it here. I was not sure if the address would be right, if my sister would know where to send them." "Your sister?" Fletcher asked. Margaret Whitmore. She is in Philadelphia." Helena straightened her shoulders, visibly composing herself. "I apologize, I am being rude. Yes, I am Helena Lawson, and I have just arrived in Chloride, and I desperately need to see those letters." Fletcher picked up her trunk, ignoring her protest that she could manage it herself. "The store is just down here," he said, gesturing with his free hand. "Come on, and I will get them for you. Are you staying at the boarding house?" "I suppose I am," Helena said, falling into step beside him. "Is it respectable?" "Mrs. Chen runs a clean establishment," Fletcher assured her. "She is strict about propriety and does not allow drinking or gambling on the premises. Most of the minors stay at the rougher places closer to the saloons. Mrs. Chen gets the schoolteacher, the assayer's assistant, and occasionally traveling businessmen." They reached the store, and Fletcher held the door open for Helena. The interior was cooler, dim after the brilliant sunlight outside. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with everything from lamp oil to ready-made shirts to jars of hard candy. The smell of coffee beans and leather and sawdust hung in the air, familiar and somehow comforting. Fletcher set Helena's trunk beside the counter and went to retrieve the wooden box from its place beneath. He set it on the counter and opened it, revealing the stack of letters, 11 in total now. The most recent had arrived just 3 days earlier. Helena reached for them with trembling hands. She picked up the top envelope and held it against her chest, her eyes closing again. "I cannot believe they are really here," she said softly. "I was so afraid something would go wrong that I would lose even this connection." Fletcher felt like he was intruding on something intensely private. He busied himself straightening the papers on the counter, trying not to watch as Helena sorted through the letters, checking the dates written in small numbers beside the addresses. "I should explain," Helena said suddenly, looking up at him. Her eyes met his, and Fletcher felt that strange shift in his chest again, stronger this time. "You must think this is very odd. A woman arriving to collect letters that have been sent to a place where she did not live." "It is not my business," Fletcher said, though in truth he desperately wanted to know. Helena set the letters down carefully on the counter. She was quiet for a moment, and Fletcher could see her weighing what to tell him, how much to reveal to this stranger who had kept her letters safe. "My husband died 6 months ago," she said finally, and her voice was steady despite the difficulty of the words. "Henry Lawson. He was killed in an accident at the factory where he worked in Philadelphia. They said it was quick, that he did not suffer, but I do not know if that was true or if they were just being kind." "I am sorry," Fletcher said, and meant it. Helena nodded, acknowledging his sympathy. "We had been married for 3 years. We were happy, or I thought we were. But after he died, I discovered he had debts I knew nothing about. Gambling debts, mostly. The men he owed came to our rooms, and they were not kind about wanting their money." Her hands were gripping the edge of the counter now, knuckles white. Fletcher waited, letting her tell the story at her own pace. "I had nothing to give them," Helena continued. "Everything of value was already gone, sold to pay other creditors. They said I could work off the debt in other ways." She met Fletcher's eyes again, and he understood what she was not saying, understood the danger she had faced. So I ran. I took what little I had and I bought a ticket west, as far west as the money would carry me. I ended up in Kansas City, working in a restaurant, trying to figure out what to do next. And your sister? Fletcher prompted gently. Margaret married well. She has a good life in Philadelphia, a husband who treats her kindly, 2 children. When I wrote to her from Kansas City, she wanted to send me money to come back, but I could not. Those men, they would find me. Philadelphia is not safe for me anymore. Helena picked up the letters again, holding them like they were precious. Margaret understood. She said she would write to me, that we could stay connected even if I was far away. But I could not stay in Kansas City either. It was too big, too many people who might recognize me or tell someone where I had gone. I needed somewhere smaller, somewhere I could disappear. So you chose Chloride, Fletcher said. I chose New Mexico territory, Helena corrected him. I chose a place far enough away that those men would never think to look for me. I worked for 3 months, saved every penny I could. And I asked Margaret to send letters here, to this town I had picked almost randomly from a map. I gave her the address, told her to write to Helena Lawson in Chloride, and I prayed that, when I finally saved enough for the stagecoach fare, the letters would be here waiting. Fletcher understood now why the letters had arrived before the woman. She had needed time to scrape together the money for the journey, needed to prepare for this leap into the unknown. You are brave, he said. Helena laughed, but there was no humor in it. I am desperate. That is not the same as brave. I think it might be, Fletcher said. They looked at each other across the counter, and something passed between them, some recognition that neither of them was quite what they appeared to be. Fletcher was not just a shopkeeper, and Helena was not just a widow fleeing debts. They were both survivors, both people who had rebuilt themselves after loss, both strangers to Chloride who had ended up in this dusty mining town at the edge of civilization. I should get you settled at the boarding house, Fletcher said, breaking the moment. Mrs. Chen will want to show you the rooms she has available, and you will want to read your letters in private. Helena nodded. Yes, thank you for keeping them safe. For not returning them or opening them or doing any of the things you might have done. It seemed wrong to give up on you, Fletcher said, even when you did not exist yet. He helped her carry her trunk to the boarding house, which was just 2 buildings down from the store. Mrs. Chen, a small woman with iron gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, looked Helena over with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She apparently approved of what she saw, because she quoted a fair weekly rate and showed Helena to a room on the 2nd floor that overlooked the street. Fletcher excused himself and returned to the store, but he found it hard to concentrate on his work. He kept thinking about Helena Lawson, about the courage it must have taken to leave everything familiar and travel alone across half the country to a town where she knew no one. He thought about her eyes, about the way they had looked when she held those letters, about the mixture of strength and vulnerability in her voice when she had told him her story. He was not a man who believed in fate or destiny. The war had beaten such notions out of him, had shown him that the universe was random and often cruel. But standing there in his store, measuring out nails for a miner who paid in silver dust, Fletcher could not shake the feeling that Helena Lawson's arrival meant something, that her letters piling up in his wooden box had been leading to this moment. The next morning, Helena came into the store just after Fletcher opened. She looked better than she had the previous day, rested and more composed. She wore a simpler dress, brown calico that was practical for the heat, and her hair was neatly pinned. I need work, she said without preamble. Mrs. Chen's rates are reasonable, but my money will only last a few weeks. Do you know anyone who is hiring? Fletcher considered the question. Jobs were scarce in Chloride, especially for women. The mines hired men exclusively. The saloons hired women too, but not for work that Helena should have to do. There was the restaurant, but the owner's wife did most of the cooking and serving with help from her daughters. What kind of work did you do in Kansas City? He asked. I waited tables at a restaurant, Helena said. Before that, in Philadelphia, I worked as a seamstress before I married. I am good with a needle, good with numbers. I can read and write and do sums. I can cook and clean and do laundry, though I would prefer not to take in washing if there are other options. An idea was forming in Fletcher's mind, one that probably was not wise but that he could not seem to dismiss. I could use help here, he said slowly. The store has been getting busier as the mines expand. I am handling the mail without any official authority, and I am falling behind on the bookkeeping. The inventory needs a thorough going over. If you are good with numbers and organization, I could pay you a small wage. Not much, but enough to cover your room at Mrs. Chen's and meals. Helena's eyes lit up. Truly, you would hire me. On a trial basis, Fletcher said, though he knew already that it would work out, that having Helena in the store felt right in a way he could not explain. We can see how it goes. If it does not suit, no hard feelings on either side. When do I start? Helena asked. Now, if you want, Fletcher said. I can show you where everything is, explain how I have been organizing things. They spent the morning together, Fletcher walking Helena through the store's systems and inventory. She picked everything up quickly, asking intelligent questions and making suggestions that actually improved his haphazard organization. By midday, she was already helping customers, measuring out dry goods and wrapping purchases with efficient movements. Fletcher watched her as she worked, noting the way she smiled at the miners who came in for tobacco and coffee, the way she was patient with the Mexican children who came to stare at the candy jars. She had a natural warmth that put people at ease, but also a brisk competence that discouraged any improper advances. When one miner made a comment that skirted the edge of disrespectful, Helena shut him down with a single cool look and a quietly firm response that left the man apologizing. You handled that well, Fletcher said after the miner had left, properly chastened. I learned quickly in Kansas City how to manage men who forget their manners, Helena said. Most of them are just testing boundaries. If you show them clearly where the boundaries are, they respect that. Most of them, Fletcher agreed, but not all. If anyone gives you real trouble, you tell me. Helena tilted her head, studying him. You would stand up for me? I would, Fletcher said simply. I do not tolerate that kind of behavior in my store. Something softened in Helena's expression. Thank you, she said quietly. The days settled into a pattern. Helena arrived each morning when Fletcher opened the store, and they worked side by side until evening. She proved invaluable, not just because she was competent with the numbers and organization, but because she brought a perspective Fletcher had lacked. She suggested carrying more variety in fabrics, pointing out that the women in town had few options for making dresses. She reorganized the displays to make items more visible and accessible. She even started keeping a ledger of what sold well and what did not, helping Fletcher make better decisions about what to order. They talked as they worked, carefully at first, then more freely as they grew comfortable with each other. Fletcher told her about Missouri, about growing up on a farm that had been burned during the war, about losing his father and 2 brothers in battles whose names he could barely stand to remember. He told her about the years of drifting afterward, working odd jobs from St. Louis to Denver, never quite finding a place that felt like home until he had stumbled into Chloride and bought the store almost on impulse. Helena told him more about her life in Philadelphia, about growing up as one of 4 sisters in a family that had just enough to get by. She talked about her father, a clerk who had died of consumption when she was 15, about her mother who had followed him 2 years later, worn down by grief and work. She talked about how she and her sisters had scattered after that, each finding their own way to survive. Margaret was the lucky one, Helena said one afternoon as they were unpacking a shipment of cooking pots. She found a good man who loved her. The rest of us were not so fortunate. Catherine married a drunk who beats her, though she would never admit it in her letters. Anne disappeared 3 years ago, and we do not know where she is or even if she is alive. And I married Henry, who seemed kind and steady but who had demons I never knew about. You could not have known, Fletcher said. Could I not? Helena set down the pot she was holding and looked at him. I should have seen something. Some sign that he was gambling our future away, that he was in over his head with dangerous men. Some people are good at hiding their troubles, Fletcher said. He knew something about that himself, about the nightmares he still had sometimes, about the ghosts that walked through his dreams. You cannot blame yourself for his choices. I know that in my head, Helena said, but my heart has not quite caught up. Fletcher understood. His own heart still carried wounds that had never properly healed. But standing there in the store with Helena, sunlight slanting through the windows and dust motes dancing in the air, he felt something shifting, some old pain beginning to ease. August arrived, bringing with it the monsoon rains that swept across the territory in fierce afternoon storms. The rain turned the street into a river of mud and drove customers into the store for shelter. Fletcher and Helena would serve them coffee from the pot that stayed warm on the store's small stove, and people would linger, talking and laughing, turning the store into an informal gathering place. Helena fit into the community as if she had always been there. The Mexican women taught her Spanish, and she picked it up quickly, soon able to converse with them about their children and gardens. The miners respected her because she never flirted or led them on, but she also never looked down on them for the dirty, dangerous work they did. Mrs. Chen approved of her because Helena was unfailingly punctual with her rent and kept her room immaculate. Even the rough men who ran the saloons gave her a wide berth, sensing somehow that she was under Fletcher's protection. Fletcher was aware of how people in town were starting to look at him and Helena, the speculative glances and knowing smiles. He knew they were wondering if something was developing between the shopkeeper and his assistant. He wondered himself. He had not thought about courting anyone since before the war, since a girl named Sarah who had promised to wait for him and then had married someone else when the months stretched into years. He had assumed that part of his life was over, that he would remain alone. But Helena made him reconsider. He found himself looking forward to her arrival each morning, found himself watching for her smile, found himself wanting to make her laugh. She had a wonderful laugh, warm and genuine, and he discovered he would go out of his way to coax it from her. He told her stories about the characters who passed through Chloride, embellishing them for comic effect. He pointed out absurdities in the catalogs they ordered from, reading the purple prose descriptions of ordinary items in dramatic voices that made her giggle. And Helena seemed to enjoy his company too. She stayed later than necessary, finding excuses to linger after the store closed. They would sit on the porch in the evening coolness, watching the light fade from the sky, talking about everything and nothing. She told him about the books she loved to read, about her dream of someday having a garden full of roses, about the way the light looked in Philadelphia in the fall. He told her about his plan to expand the store, about his hope of bringing in more goods for the families, about his dream of making Chloride a real town with schools and churches and a future beyond just the mines. One evening in late August, as they sat on the porch and watched thunderheads building over the mountains, Helena said, "I received another letter from Margaret today." "Good news, I hope," Fletcher said. "She is well. The children are growing. She asks when I will send for her to visit or when I might come back east." Helena was quiet for a moment. "She does not understand why I will not return." "You told her about the debts?" Fletcher asked. "I told her they were serious, but I do not think she grasps how serious. Her husband is well off. They have never worried about money. She cannot imagine men who would hurt a woman over a few $100s. Helena's hands twisted in her lap. "But I remember their faces, Fletcher. I remember the way they looked at me when they described how I could pay. I can never go back there." Fletcher reached over without thinking and covered her hands with his own. Her skin was warm, her fingers slender beneath his calloused palm. "You do not have to go back," he said. "You have a place here." Helena looked down at their joined hands, then up at his face. "Do I?" she asked softly. "Yes," Fletcher said, "for as long as you want it." She turned her hand over so their palms met, and Fletcher felt the touch all the way through him. They sat there as the thunder rumbled closer and the first drops of rain began to fall, neither of them moving, neither of them wanting to break the connection. The rain came harder, driving them inside. Fletcher lit the lamps while Helena checked that all the windows were closed. They found themselves standing close together in the narrow space between the counter and the shelves, closer than was strictly proper. Fletcher could see the pulse beating in Helena's throat, could see the way her breath quickened. "Helena," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. "Yes," she whispered. "I think," Fletcher began, then stopped. What did he think? That he was falling in love with her, that she had become the center of his days, that he wanted a future that included her. All of those things were true, but they felt too large to say aloud, too frightening in their implications. "I think I should walk you back to the boarding house," he finished, though that was not what he had started to say at all. Disappointment flickered across Helena's face, quickly hidden. "Yes," she agreed. "It is getting late." Fletcher grabbed an oilcloth coat and held it over both their heads as they hurried through the rain to the boarding house. The street was empty, everyone else having had the sense to stay indoors. At the door to the boarding house, Helena turned to face him, water dripping from her hair and down her face. "Thank you," she said, "for everything, for keeping my letters, for giving me work, for being kind." "Helena," Fletcher said again, and this time he did not stop himself. "I am not just being kind, I care about you, more than I probably should." Her eyes widened. "Fletcher, you do not have to say anything," he continued quickly. "I know you are still grieving your husband. I know you came here to escape, not to find something new, but I needed you to know. I needed you to understand that what I feel for you, it is not just kindness." Helena reached up and touched his face, her wet fingers cool against his jaw. "Henry has been dead for 6 months, she said quietly. "And if I am honest, he was lost to me long before that, lost to the gambling and the drinking and the lies. I mourned him, but I also mourned what I thought we had, what I realized we never really did. So when I say I care about you too, Fletcher Fontaine, I am not betraying anyone's memory. I am choosing something real for the first time in a very long while." Fletcher caught her hand in his, turning his face to press a kiss to her palm. "I want to court you properly," he said, "with everyone knowing my intentions are honorable. I want to give you time, but I also want you to know I am serious about this." "I want that too," Helena said, and her smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. The courtship became the talk of Chloride. Fletcher and Helena were already together so much of the time that the formal acknowledgement did not change their daily routine substantially, but it changed the nature of their interactions in subtle ways. Fletcher felt free now to touch her hand when they passed items back and forth, to stand close to her when they were reviewing the account books, to look at her with all the warmth he felt instead of trying to hide it. On Sundays, when the store was closed, Fletcher would call on Helena at the boarding house. They would walk together through the town and out into the surrounding hills, talking and sometimes simply enjoying each other's company in comfortable silence. Helena told him more about her marriage, about the small, happy moments that had existed alongside the larger troubles, about her fear that she had failed in some fundamental way. Fletcher told her about the war, about things he had never spoken of to anyone else, about the friends he had lost and the choices he still questioned. "We all carry our scars," Helena said one Sunday as they sat on a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley. "But maybe that is not a bad thing. Maybe it means we understand better what matters." "What do you think matters?" Fletcher asked. Helena considered the question seriously. "Kindness," she said finally. "Loyalty, being honest even when it is hard. Creating something good in the world, even if it is something small like a well-run store or letters that make someone feel less alone." She looked at him. "What about you?" "I used to think it was about survival," Fletcher said. "Just getting through each day, not letting the past destroy you. But now I think it is about connection, about finding people who see you for who you really are and choosing to stay anyway. Is that what we are doing? Helena asked. Choosing to stay? I am, Fletcher said. If you are. I am, Helena said and kissed him. It was their first kiss, there on the rocks with the whole valley spread below them and hawks circling overhead. Fletcher had kissed women before, but nothing had felt like this sense of rightness, of coming home after a long exile. Helena's lips were soft, her hand coming up to rest against his chest where his heart was pounding. They broke apart slowly, both of them breathing hard, both of them grinning like fools. I have wanted to do that for weeks, Fletcher admitted. I have wanted you to do that for weeks, Helena said, laughing. They walked back to town holding hands, and Fletcher knew that everyone they passed noted it and would soon spread the news. He did not care. Let them talk. Let them know that Fletcher Fontaine had found something precious and had no intention of letting it go. September brought cooler weather and busier times at the store as people prepared for winter. Fletcher ordered in extra supplies, anticipating the needs of families who would be snowed in for weeks at a time once the real cold arrived. Helena helped him organize everything, creating a system for tracking who needed credit and who was reliable about paying. She also started teaching some of the Mexican children to read English in the back room of the store, using primers she ordered from Santa Fe. Fletcher would listen to her patient voice sounding out words while he worked the counter, and he would think about how much richer his life had become since she arrived. In early October, trouble arrived in the form of 3 men who rode into town on horses that looked like they had been ridden hard. Fletcher was alone in the store when they entered, Helena having gone to the boarding house for lunch. The men looked around with the air of people cataloging everything, noting exits and valuables. Fletcher felt his instincts from the war kick in, the old wariness that had kept him alive through battles and skirmishes. "Help you gentlemen with something?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral. The tallest of the 3, a man with a scarred face and cold eyes, stepped forward. "We are looking for someone," he said. "A woman, brown hair, green eyes, maybe traveling alone. She would have arrived in the last few months." Fletcher's blood went cold, but he kept his expression blank. "Lots of people pass through Chloride," he said. "Most of them men working the mines, but there are women too. You have a name for this person you are seeking?" "She might be using the name Helena Lawson," the scarred man said, watching Fletcher's face carefully. "Or she might be using something else. Her real name was Helena Morris before she married." "Does not ring any bells," Fletcher lied smoothly. "What does she want with you?" "Other way around," the scarred man said. "She owes money to some associates of ours, a lot of money. Her late husband incurred debts, and those debts transferred to her." "That does not sound legal," Fletcher said. The man's smile was not pleasant. "We are not lawyers, we are debt collectors, and we always collect one way or another." Fletcher wanted to throw them out bodily, wanted to reach for the shotgun he kept under the counter. But 3 against 1 were poor odds, and violence would only confirm that he knew something worth protecting. "Well, I have not seen anyone matching that description," he said. "But I will keep an eye out. You staying in town?" "For a few days," the scarred man said. "We will be asking around. If you hear anything, you can find us at the Silver Strike Saloon." They left, and Fletcher immediately locked the door and flipped the closed sign. He had to find Helena, had to warn her. But he also had to be careful not to lead the men directly to her. He forced himself to wait 5 minutes, to count slowly and breathe steadily, before he unlocked the door and stepped out onto the street. Helena was walking back from the boarding house, smiling at something Mrs. Chen had said to her. Fletcher caught up with her before she reached the store, taking her arm gently but firmly. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "Not here, come with me." He led her around back of the store to the small room where he lived. It was sparse, just a bed and a table and a chair, but it was private. Helena looked confused and then frightened as she saw his expression. "What is wrong?" she asked. Fletcher told her about the men, about what they had said and asked. He watched the color drain from Helena's face, watched her hands start to shake. "They found me," she whispered. "I thought I had gone far enough, hidden well enough. How did they find me?" "I do not know," Fletcher said. "But we need to figure out what to do. You cannot leave town right now, not with them watching. That would only confirm their suspicions, but you also cannot let them see you." Helena sank onto the edge of his bed, her head in her hands. "This is my fault," she said. "I brought this danger here. I should have kept running, should never have stayed in one place long enough for them to track me." Fletcher knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "You are not alone in this. We will figure it out together, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Helena met his eyes, and despite her fear, she nodded. "I trust you." "Good," Fletcher said. "Here is what we are going to do. You are going to stay here in my room. No one comes back here, so you will be safe. I will tell people you have gone to Sakaro for supplies, that you took the morning stage. Meanwhile, I will figure out what these men know and what they are planning." "I cannot ask you to lie for me," Helena protested. "If they find out, they might hurt you." "They will not find out," Fletcher said with more confidence than he felt. "And even if they do, I can handle myself." He convinced Helena to stay hidden, bringing her food and water when he could do so without being observed. The men from Philadelphia made themselves at home at the Silver Strike, drinking and asking questions. Fletcher kept his ears open, listening to the gossip that filtered through town. The men were thorough, he would give them that. They asked at the boarding houses and the restaurant and even at the church. They showed a photograph to anyone who would look, a small tintype that Fletcher never got to see. On the third day, the scarred man came back into the store. "Funny thing," he said without preamble. "We heard that you hired an assistant a few months back, woman named Helena Lawson. But when we asked to meet her, seems she is conveniently out of town." "That is right," Fletcher said calmly, though his heart was racing. "She went to Sakaro to visit a sick friend, should be back in a week or so." "Convenient timing," the man said. "Just coincidence," Fletcher replied. "This friend has consumption, could be her last chance to say goodbye." The man studied Fletcher for a long moment. "You are a good liar," he said finally. "I almost believe you, but here is what I think. I think this Helena Lawson is the woman we are looking for. I think she is here in this town somewhere, and I think you know exactly where she is." Fletcher said nothing, just returned the man's stare with steady calm. "We can make this easy or hard," the scarred man continued. "Easy is, you tell us where she is, we collect what we are owed, and we leave. Hard is, we tear this town apart until we find her, and if anyone gets hurt in the process, that is on you." "I do not respond well to threats," Fletcher said quietly. "That was not a threat," the man said. "That was a promise." After the man left, Fletcher knew they were running out of time. He could not keep Helena hidden indefinitely, and he could not fight off 3 armed men by himself. He needed help, but he had to be careful about who he trusted. Many of the miners were decent men, but they had their own troubles and would not risk themselves for a woman they barely knew. That evening, Fletcher sought out Sheriff Dalton, the aging lawman who spent most of his time dealing with drunk miners and claim disputes. Dalton listened to Fletcher's story with a grave expression. "Those men are not breaking any laws just by being here," Dalton said finally. "And if they have legitimate debts to collect, the law is on their side, not hers." "Even if the debt was her husband's?" Fletcher asked. "Even if she did not know about it?" "Depends on how the debt was structured," Dalton said. "If the husband signed her name to any papers, she could be liable. Either way, these men do not sound like the type to care much about legal niceties. They will do what they came to do, and they will leave, and there is not much I can do to stop them unless they break the law in front of me." Fletcher left the sheriff's office feeling defeated. The law was not going to help. He was going to have to find another way. He returned to the store to find Helena standing in the main room, having left his room despite his instructions. She had his shotgun in her hands and a determined look on her face. "No," Fletcher said immediately. "Whatever you are thinking, no." "I cannot hide anymore," Helena said. I cannot let them threaten you or this town because of me. I am going to talk to them, try to make them understand that I do not have any money, that there is nothing to collect. They do not want to understand, Fletcher said, crossing to her and gently taking the shotgun. They want what they came for, and they will not leave without it. Then I will give them what they came for, Helena said. I will go with them. Absolutely not, Fletcher said fiercely. Do you understand what they will do to you? They already told you back in Philadelphia. I will not let that happen. Helena's eyes filled with tears. I do not see another choice. There is always another choice, Fletcher said. He set the shotgun down and pulled Helena into his arms, holding her tight. We just have to find it. They stood there together in the dimness of the closed store, and Fletcher's mind raced through possibilities. He could help Helena run, but the men would follow. He could try to buy them off, but he did not have the kind of money they were demanding. He could fight them, but that would likely end with someone dead, possibly him, and then Helena would be defenseless. Then an idea came to him, risky and uncertain, but possibly their only chance. How much does your husband owe? He asked. Around $400, Helena said. It might as well be $4,000 for all the chance I have of paying it. $400. It was a substantial sum, but not impossible. Fletcher had been careful with his money since buying the store, saving slowly but steadily. He had almost $200 in the safe, money he had been setting aside for expansion, for the future. It was not enough, but it was a start. I need you to trust me, Fletcher said. I have an idea, but I need time to make it work. What kind of idea? Helena asked. The kind where we do not give them what they want, but we give them something they might accept instead, Fletcher said. Over the next 2 days, Fletcher worked quietly. He took out his savings from the safe, the neat stack of bills that represented 2 years of hard work. Then he went to some of the more successful mine owners, men he had given fair deals and extended reasonable credit to, men who might remember his kindness. He explained the situation carefully, not asking for charity, but for loans that he promised to repay with interest. Some turned him down. But others, perhaps remembering times when Fletcher had been generous with them, or perhaps simply respecting his nerve, contributed what they could. $50 from the owner of the Lucky Strike mine, $75 from the assayer who had set up business the previous year, $20 from Mrs. Chen, who said she trusted Fletcher more than any bank, $30 more from the owner of the restaurant, who had a daughter and understood the danger Helena faced. By the end of the second day, Fletcher had $390. He needed 10 more. He looked around his store, at the inventory he had carefully built up, and made a decision. He sold his best saddle, the one that had carried him from Missouri to New Mexico, to a cowboy passing through town. The cowboy paid him $15, and Fletcher used the extra $5 to buy a decent meal for himself and Helena. That evening, he went to the Silver Strike Saloon. The 3 men from Philadelphia were there, playing cards and drinking whiskey. Fletcher walked up to their table and set a thick envelope down in front of the scarred man. $400, Fletcher said. Payment in full for the debt of Henry Lawson. The scarred man picked up the envelope and counted the bills slowly, his eyes narrowing. Where is the woman? He asked. That is none of your concern, Fletcher said. You came for money, there is your money, now you can leave. The debt is not yours to pay, the man said. I am making it mine, Fletcher replied. You have what you came for, take it and go. The 3 men exchanged glances. Fletcher kept his hand near his hip, near the pistol he had strapped on before coming to the saloon. He was not a fast draw, had never claimed to be, but he would defend himself if necessary. Finally, the scarred man nodded. All right, he said. We came for $400. We have $400. The debt is settled. I want that in writing, Fletcher said. He had brought paper and a pen, and he set them on the table. A receipt showing that the debt of Henry Lawson has been paid in full and that no further claims will be made against his widow. The scarred man actually laughed. "You have some stones on you," he said, but he wrote out the receipt, signed it, and pushed it across the table. "She must be something special for you to beggar yourself like this." "She is," Fletcher said simply. He took the receipt and walked out of the saloon, feeling the men's eyes on his back every step of the way. He did not breathe easily until he was back at the store, the door locked behind him. Helena was waiting in his room, pacing anxiously. When Fletcher showed her the receipt, she stared at it for a long moment as if she could not quite believe it was real. "You paid my debt," she said finally, her voice choked with emotion. "Fletcher, you cannot have had $400. What did you do?" "What I needed to do," Fletcher said. "And before you say you will pay me back, do not. I did not do this as a loan. I did this because I love you and I will not let anyone hurt you or take you away." Helena looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "You love me?" "I love you," Fletcher confirmed. "I have loved you since the moment you asked about your letters, maybe even before that, when they were piling up and I was waiting for you to exist. So you do not owe me anything except to stay here and build a life with me, if that is what you want." "It is what I want," Helena said, and then she was in his arms, kissing him with all the passion and gratitude and love that she felt. The men from Philadelphia left town the next morning on the early stage. Fletcher and Helena watched them go from the porch of the store, Helena's hand tight in Fletcher's. "It is really over," she said wonderingly. "It is really over," Fletcher agreed. Helena turned to face him, her expression serious. "I meant what I said. I will find a way to pay you back. It might take years, but I will do it." "Marry me instead," Fletcher said. Helena blinked. "What? Marry me?" Fletcher repeated. "Not because you owe me, but because we love each other and we work well together and I want to spend my life with you. Marry me and let us build something good here in Chloride. A store that serves the community, maybe eventually a family of our own. What do you say?" Helena laughed, the sound bright and joyful. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church at the edge of town. Mrs. Chen stood as Helena's witness, and the owner of the Lucky Strike mine stood as Fletcher's. Helena wore a dress she had made herself from fabric in the store, pale blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes. Fletcher wore his best shirt and pants, his hair slicked back and his boots polished. Sheriff Dalton performed the ceremony, reading the words from a book that had seen many weddings before. When Fletcher kissed his bride, the small congregation cheered. They had a modest celebration afterward in the store, which Helena had decorated with wildflowers from the hills. People brought food and well wishes, and someone produced a fiddle, and there was dancing in the street as the sun set. That night, Helena moved her few possessions from the boarding house to the room behind the store that was now their room, their home. They lay together in Fletcher's narrow bed, which would need to be replaced with something bigger, and talked about their future. "I want to write to Margaret," Helena said. "I want to tell her that I am safe, that I am happy, that I found something real in this dusty mining town at the end of the world." "It is not the end of the world," Fletcher protested mildly. "Just close to it." Helena laughed and kissed him. "My wonderful, brave husband," she said, "you gave up everything you had to save me." "I did not give it up," Fletcher corrected. "I invested it, and I am going to get much more in return than I paid out." "How do you figure?" Helena asked. "Well, I got a brilliant assistant who tripled my business efficiency," Fletcher said. "And I got a wife who makes me happier than I knew I could be. And someday, if we are blessed, I will get children who will inherit a store and a legacy and a story about how their parents found each other against all odds. That seems like a good return on investment to me." Helena smiled, her eyes glistening with happy tears. "When you put it that way, I suppose you got a bargain." "The best bargain of my life," Fletcher agreed. The months that followed were the happiest Fletcher had ever known. He and Helena ran the store together, a true partnership in every sense. They expanded the inventory based on Helena's careful tracking of what customers wanted. They hired a young man to help with the heavy lifting so Helena did not have to strain herself. They began planning an actual expansion to the building, adding a proper storefront and more room for merchandise. Helena continued teaching the children who wanted to learn, and Fletcher found himself helping sometimes, reading aloud from newspapers and books while Helena walked among the students, correcting their slates. They talked about starting a real school, about convincing the territorial government to send a certified teacher, about building a future for Chloride that went beyond just mining silver. In the spring of 1884, Helena discovered she was pregnant. She told Fletcher one evening as they were closing up the store, her face glowing with joy and nervousness. Fletcher picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Helena asked, though she could clearly see that he was. "I am happier than I have any right to be," Fletcher said. "After everything I have seen, everything I have lost, I did not think I would get to have this. A wife, a home, a child. It feels like a miracle." "It feels that way to me too," Helena said softly. "After Henry, after the debts and the running and the fear, I thought I would spend my life alone, just surviving. But you gave me more than survival. You gave me a life worth living." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Helena continued working in the store until her 6th month, when Fletcher finally convinced her to take it easier. She protested that she was not fragile, but he worried, and she loved him for worrying. She spent her time sewing baby clothes and knitting blankets, preparing for the arrival of their child with happy focus. Margaret sent a package when she received Helena's letter announcing the pregnancy, a beautiful christening gown that had been in their family for generations, along with a letter expressing her joy and her hope that someday she might visit her sister in the far west. In September of 1884, on a cool morning when the aspens were turning gold on the mountainsides, Helena went into labor. Mrs. Chen attended her, having delivered many babies in her long life. Fletcher paced outside the room, listening to Helena's cries and feeling utterly helpless. The labor lasted 6 hours, which Mrs. Chen said was good for a first baby. When Fletcher was finally allowed into the room, he found Helena exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had knitted. "Your son," Helena said, and Fletcher took the baby with trembling hands. He looked down at the tiny face, at the miniature fingers that curled instinctively around his thumb, and felt something break open in his chest. "Hello," he whispered to the baby. "Hello, little one, I am your father." They named him Thomas, after Fletcher's father who had died in the war. Thomas grew healthy and strong, thriving despite the harsh conditions of the mining town. He learned to walk holding onto the shelves in the store, pulling himself up and toddling between displays while customers smiled and made way for him. He was a happy baby, quick to laugh and curious about everything. Helena proved to be a wonderful mother, patient and loving, but also practical. She did not coddle Thomas, but let him explore and learn, only intervening when he was truly in danger. Fletcher marveled at her, at how she had transformed from the frightened woman who had stepped off the stage to this confident mother and business owner. The store continued to prosper. They completed the expansion in 1885, adding proper glass windows and a second room that they used for their growing inventory of fabrics and domestic goods. Fletcher hired 2 assistants, young men from town who wanted to learn the business. Helena taught them the inventory system she had developed, and Fletcher taught them about fair dealing and customer service. In the summer of 1886, Helena became pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the first, and Fletcher worried constantly. But Helena remained serene, trusting that everything would be well. In February of 1887, she delivered a daughter they named Sarah, after the girl Fletcher had once thought he would marry. It was Helena's idea to use the name, to reclaim it for something happy rather than letting it remain a bitter memory. Sarah was different from Thomas, quieter and more observant. While Thomas charged through life with enthusiasm, Sarah watched and considered. Fletcher loved them both fiercely, these two small people who called him Papa and looked at him like he could solve any problem. The years passed in the particular rhythm of family life. Thomas started school when the town finally got a teacher, a young woman from Kansas who boarded with Mrs. Chen. Sarah followed 3 years later, shy at first but quickly making friends. Helena served on the school board, advocating for better books and supplies. Fletcher became a town councilman, helping make decisions about roads and water and the future of Chloride. They heard occasionally from Margaret, whose letters became less frequent as the years went by, but remained affectionate. Catherine, the sister who had married poorly, eventually left her husband and moved in with Margaret. Anne, who had disappeared, was never found, though they never stopped hoping for news. The men from Philadelphia never returned. The scarred man's receipt remained in Fletcher's safe, a reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. Sometimes Helena would take it out and look at it, still amazed that Fletcher had been willing to give up so much for her. It was not a sacrifice, Fletcher always said when she brought it up. It was an investment, remember, and it paid better returns than I ever imagined. In 1890, when Thomas was 6 and Sarah was 3, Fletcher and Helena celebrated their 6th wedding anniversary. They closed the store for the day, something they almost never did, and took the children on a picnic up into the hills. They sat on the same rocky outcrop where Fletcher and Helena had shared their first kiss, looking down at Chloride spread out below them. "Do you ever think about how it might have been different?" Helena asked. "If I had arrived a few weeks earlier, before the letters piled up." "If you had not kept them safe, all the time," Fletcher admitted, "and I am grateful every day that things happened exactly as they did." "Even the hard parts?" Helena asked. "The men from Philadelphia, the debt, the danger, even those," Fletcher said, "because they led us here. To this moment, with our children playing in the grass and our whole lives ahead of us, I would not change any of it." Helena leaned her head on his shoulder. "My wonderful, brave husband," she said, echoing the words she had spoken on their wedding night. "I love you more now than I did then." "I love you more too," Fletcher said. "I did not know it was possible to keep loving someone more and more, but you teach me that every day." Thomas came running up with a handful of wildflowers he had picked for his mother. Sarah followed more slowly, carrying a smooth stone she had found interesting. They were beautiful children, healthy and happy, growing up in a world that Fletcher and Helena were doing their best to make better. That evening, back at the store, after the children were asleep, Helena and Fletcher sat together going over the accounts. It was their habit, this quiet time when they planned and dreamed together. "I have been thinking," Helena said. "The store is doing well. Very well, actually. We could afford to bring in more employees, maybe even think about opening a second location." "Where were you thinking?" Fletcher asked, intrigued. "Socorro, perhaps," Helena said. "It is growing and they need a good general store. We could hire a manager to run it, someone we trust." "It would be a good investment." Fletcher smiled. "Listen to you talking about investments. You have come a long way from the woman who stepped off the stage with nothing but a carpetbag." "I had more than that," Helena said. "I had letters from my sister and I had hope. And I had you waiting for me, even though you did not know it yet." "I knew something was waiting," Fletcher said. "I felt it every time I put another letter in that box. I was waiting for you to exist." "And then I did," Helena said softly. "And then you did," Fletcher agreed. They sat together in comfortable silence, the lamp burning low, the store around them quiet and peaceful. Outside, Chloride settled into night, miners heading home from their shifts, families gathering for dinner, the saloons beginning to fill with men looking for entertainment. It was not a glamorous life. Chloride was still rough around the edges, still primarily a mining town with all the problems that entailed. But it was their life, built from nothing by two people who had been running from their pasts and had found in each other a reason to stop running and start building. The children grew. Thomas showed an aptitude for numbers and began helping with the inventory when he was 8. Sarah preferred the creative side, arranging displays and helping customers choose fabrics and colors. They were good children, polite and hardworking, and Fletcher felt pride every time he watched them interact with the townspeople. In 1892, when Thomas was 8 and Sarah was 5, Helena became pregnant again unexpectedly. She was 34 now, and the pregnancy was harder than the previous 2. Fletcher worried constantly, but Helena remained cheerful, insisting that she was fine. "We are getting another blessing," she would say. "I refuse to waste it by worrying." In the spring of 1893, Helena delivered twins, a boy and a girl they named William and Grace. The labor was difficult, and for a few terrifying hours, Fletcher thought he might lose Helena. But she came through it, weak but alive, and the twins were healthy despite being small. 4 children, Helena said wonderingly, holding the twins while Thomas and Sarah peered at their new siblings with fascination. "I never imagined I would be blessed with 4 children." "They are lucky to have you as their mother," Fletcher said, kissing her forehead. The house behind the store was too small now for a family of 6. Fletcher began planning a proper house, something with multiple bedrooms and a real kitchen. He purchased land on the edge of town, where the wind was not quite so dusty, and there was room for Helena's long-dreamed-of garden. They built the house slowly, as money allowed, doing much of the work themselves with help from friends in town. It took 2 years, but in 1895 they moved into a beautiful 2-story house with a wide porch and windows that let in the morning light. Helena planted roses that first summer, and though the climate was harsh, some of them survived and bloomed, their flowers a defiant splash of beauty against the stark landscape. The store continued to thrive. The second location in Socorro opened in 1896, managed by one of the young men Fletcher had trained. It did well almost immediately, and within a year was turning a healthy profit. Fletcher and Helena began to think about expanding further, about building a small chain of stores across the territory. Thomas announced when he was 12 that he wanted to go to college, to study business, and then come back to help run the family enterprise. Fletcher and Helena were thrilled, already saving money to make it possible. Sarah wanted to be a teacher, inspired by the woman who had taught her. The twins were too young to know what they wanted yet, but they showed signs of being as bright and determined as their older siblings. On a warm evening in June of 1898, Fletcher and Helena celebrated their 14th wedding anniversary. The children had planned a surprise party, decorating the new house with streamers and flowers. Friends from all over town came, bringing food and gifts and well wishes. Sheriff Dalton, now ancient and retired but still sharp-witted, raised a glass and gave a toast. "To Fletcher and Helena," he said, "who came to Chloride as strangers and became the heart of this community, may they have 40 more years together." "Hear, hear," everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Later, after the guests had left and the children were asleep, Fletcher and Helena sat on their porch looking up at the stars. The desert night was cool and clear, the Milky Way a river of light across the sky. 14 years, Helena said. "It feels like forever and like no time at all." "I know what you mean," Fletcher said. "Sometimes I can barely remember what my life was like before you." "Quieter, probably," Helena said with a laugh. "Emptier, definitely," Fletcher replied. "You filled all the empty spaces, Helena, you and our children and this life we have built together." Helena took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Do you ever think about that letter?" she asked. "The first one that arrived for a woman who did not exist." "All the time," Fletcher said. "I think about how easily it could have been different. If I had returned it to your sister, if I had thrown it away, if you had chosen a different town to disappear to, so many things that could have gone wrong." "But they went right," Helena said. "Against all odds, they went right." "They went right because you were brave enough to keep running until you found a place you could stop," Fletcher said. "And because you were brave enough to trust me when I asked you to stay." "It was not just bravery," Helena said. "It was hope. I had lost everything, but I still hoped there was something better waiting for me. And there was. You were waiting for me, keeping my letters safe, keeping a place for me to exist." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes after years of knowing someone deeply. Fletcher thought about all the years behind them and all the years ahead. He thought about Thomas going off to college, about Sarah becoming a teacher, about William and Grace growing up in a world where they were safe and loved. He thought about growing old with Helena, about watching their children have children of their own, about leaving behind something good and lasting. "Thank you," he said suddenly. Helena turned to look at him. "For what?" "For existing," Fletcher said, "for showing up in Chloride that day. For staying, for building this life with me, for everything." Helena's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Thank you for waiting," she said, "for keeping my letters safe, for seeing me, really seeing me when I had been invisible for so long. For loving me even when I did not think I deserved to be loved." "You always deserve to be loved," Fletcher said fiercely. "Always." They kissed, a long, slow kiss that held 14 years of love and partnership and shared struggle. When they finally drew apart, both of them were smiling. "Come to bed," Helena said. "Tomorrow we'll come early and the store will not run itself." "Actually, with the new employees, it pretty much does run itself," Fletcher pointed out. "Then come to bed anyway," Helena said, laughing, "because I want you there." Fletcher rose and followed his wife into their house, their home, the place they had made together out of nothing but courage and hope and love. Behind them, Chloride slept under the stars, a town that had seen them arrive as strangers and had watched them become something more. The years continued to unfold. Thomas did go to college, studying business at a school in Denver. He returned in 1903, a young man of 19 with new ideas and ambitions. He married in 1905, a bright young woman named Emma who had grown up in Chloride, and they began planning a third store location in Albuquerque. Sarah became a teacher as she had dreamed, taking over the classroom in Chloride when the previous teacher retired. She was beloved by her students, patient and creative, much like her mother. She married later, at 25, to a mining engineer who treated her like she was precious, and they settled in a house near Fletcher and Helena. William and Grace, the twins, grew up wild and free in a way their older siblings had not been able to, their parents more relaxed and confident by the time they came along. William showed an interest in mining itself, fascinated by the geology and mechanics of extracting silver from the earth. Grace wanted to be a doctor, an ambitious dream for a girl in the territory, but Fletcher and Helena supported her completely, already making plans to send her east for medical school. Fletcher turned 50 in 1903, and Helena threw him a party that seemed like the whole town attended. He looked around at the gathering, at his children and grandchildren, at his wife, who was somehow even more beautiful to him at 45 than she had been at 25, and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The store had become 3 stores, the Fontaine General stores known for fair prices and quality goods across New Mexico territory. They employed dozens of people, providing good wages and steady work. Fletcher had used some of his profits to help fund the school, to bring in better teachers, to buy books and supplies. Helena had started a lending library in the original store, open to anyone who wanted to borrow books. Together, they had helped transform Chloride from a rough mining town into a real community with a future. But it was not just the business success that mattered. It was the family they had created, the love they had built, the life they had made together against all odds. One evening in 1908, when Fletcher was 55 and Helena was 50, they returned to the rocky outcrop overlooking the valley. They had not been back in years, too busy with children and grandchildren and the demands of running a growing business. But Thomas and Emma had volunteered to watch the younger children, and Sarah had insisted her parents take a day for themselves. They sat on the rocks as they had so many years ago, looking down at Chloride. The town had grown, new buildings filling in spaces that had been empty when they first arrived, but it was still recognizably the same place, still their home. "Do you remember the first time we came here?" Helena asked. Of course, Fletcher said. You told me what mattered. Kindness and loyalty and honesty, creating something good. And you said it was about connection, Helena reminded him, about finding people who see you for who you really are and choosing to stay. We were both right, Fletcher said. All of those things matter, and we have had them all. Helena leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her. She fit against his side perfectly, the way she always had, the way she always would. I got your letter, Fletcher said suddenly. Helena looked up at him, confused. What letter? Not a real letter, Fletcher clarified. But you sent me a message anyway. All those letters from your sister piling up in my store. They were a message that you were coming, that you would exist someday, that I just had to wait. And I did. I waited for you, Helena, and you came. Tears streamed down Helena's face, but she was smiling. I came, she agreed. And you were here. You were here keeping my place safe, keeping a space for me to exist. How did you know? I did not know, Fletcher said. I just hoped, the same way you hoped when you bought that ticket west. The same way we have both hoped our whole lives, that there was something better waiting, something worth fighting for. And there was, Helena whispered. There was this, us, our family, our life, all of it. They sat together as the sun set over the valley, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Somewhere below, their children were preparing dinner. Their grandchildren were playing. Their stores were closing for the night, employees heading home to their own families. The world they had built together was spinning on, full of life and love and possibility. Thank you for existing, Fletcher said again, the way he had said so many times over the years. Thank you for waiting, Helena replied, the way she always did. They stayed on the outcrop until the stars came out, the same stars that had shone over them on their wedding night, on the night each of their children was born, on every night of their life together. The same stars that would shine over their children and grandchildren and generations yet to come. When they finally descended to return home, Fletcher took Helena's hand to help her over the rough spots. They had climbed this path so many times that they knew every rock and turn by heart. It was their path, the one they had chosen together, the one that had led them from strangers to partners to lovers to parents to the architects of a life neither of them could have imagined when they started. At the house, their family waited. Thomas and Emma had made dinner, a feast spread out on the big table in the dining room. Sarah had brought her children, and they were running around the yard, chasing fireflies in the summer dusk. William was arguing good-naturedly with the twins about something, their voices carrying through the open windows. Grace was reading in a corner, looking up occasionally to smile at the chaos around her. Helena stood in the doorway, taking it all in. This, she said softly, this is what we made. We did, Fletcher agreed, coming to stand beside her. Out of letters and hope and courage and love, we made all of this. They walked into their house, into the noise and warmth and love of their family. They sat down to dinner, the table crowded and loud and perfect. They told stories and laughed and made plans for the future. They were together, all of them, bound by love and blood and choice. Later, much later, when everyone had gone home or gone to bed, Fletcher and Helena lay together in the darkness. They were older now, their hair gray and their bodies not as strong as they once were. But they were still them, still Fletcher and Helena, still the cowboy who had kept the letters and the woman who had finally come to claim them. I would do it all again, Helena whispered into the darkness. So would I, Fletcher replied. Every moment, every challenge, every joy, all of it as long as it led me back to you. It would, Helena said with certainty. In every life, in every world, I think we would find each other. Some things are just meant to be. Some things, Fletcher agreed, and kissed her good night. They fell asleep together, the way they had for 24 years, the way they would for whatever years remained to them. Outside, Chloride slept. The stores were locked up tight. The children were safe in their beds. The letters that had started everything were tucked away in a box, yellowed with age but still precious. Still a reminder of how a woman who did not exist had come into being. and how a cowboy who had been waiting without knowing it had finally found what he had been waiting for. It was not a fairy tale. It was better than a fairy tale. It was real, built on hard work and sacrifice and the daily choice to keep loving even when it was difficult. It was a life, full and rich and meaningful, created by two people who had been broken and had found in each other a way to be whole. And that, in the end, was everything.